Welcome to the Operation Move podcast. My name is Zoe and I hear that it is now 2021. So it's the 8th of January when I'm recording this, and this is so typical. I came into the office to record this. I had to retrieve a mouse first because one of the kids had stolen it for their laptop, which I get it, but it also kind of defeats the purpose of having a laptop if you've got 5 million things attached to it. But anyway, I came into the office thinking, yep, got my coffee, I'll record something for the beginning of the year, nice and quick. And then I got distracted putting new podcast artwork up, and now it's like 50 minutes later. And so that happened. We're going away for the weekend, luckily, in Queensland, and just heard that Brisbane is locked down for 3 days, but we're going further north than Brisbane, so we should be okay. Anyway, I'm sure that I guess it was March last year when all of this sort of COVID craziness started happening. No one would have imagined that we would get to 2021 and it would still be happening. But I think that now, well, at least I know for me, I'm sort of getting to the point where I'm like, okay, I think that we should be hopefully getting back to some normalcy towards the end of this year, but it's now become normal enough that I'm like, okay, I can get things in place and without feeling like my life is on hold. And so that's sort of been a big focus for me for the new year. And it can be a tough time because I know like there are lots of people who like to set goals at the beginning of the year, or like to have resolutions, and there are a lot of people who are against that, and the social media around it can be a real quagmire because it's sort of like you've got a million people saying no, like love yourself enough to like don't feel like you have to change anything, which is true. But also then you've got like a whole bunch of people who actually would like to invest in themselves and change the way they do things or change their habits or whatever. And it can kind of like feel like there's not always like a great way to express that or set that up, because it's just like there's just a lot of pressure and judgment either way. So anyway, for me, this year there were a lot of less than ideal habits from last year that I'm looking at working on. So rather than, for me, I guess now being close to sort of 10 years into running, like the running will happen either way, but how great the running is really depends on like how great the other things are. So my focus was really on setting up the other things that are going to support the running, because it's the other things that are going to like get in the running's way, not the running itself. And so for me, that's usually a lot more stuff to do with mindfulness. So I've done 10 minutes a day of meditation every day so far this year. And like the first couple of times it was like it took me a little while to get going. Like yesterday felt pretty natural and I didn't like get too sort of like fidgety, but it's also just about like knowing that all of that sort of stuff happens and just doing it. Like the sort of like the goal of meditation is not to be there and sit there with an empty mind. It's like about being present in the moment, whatever that looks like. So I've been doing that. I'm not sure, like I think I would like to get up to sort of like 15 to 20 minutes, but for now 10 minutes is good. And so I've been doing that. And I've also started doing my yin yoga I like to do that at the end of the day. Like I think that's a nice thing to do at the end of the day. That's when I enjoy it. I usually do it after my meditation. So I meditate. And I know like a lot of people would probably get more out of their meditation at the beginning of the day. But usually there's just a bit on, and I've just found it easier to find that space for meditation in the afternoon. So I'll tend to meditate and then do yoga. And that's a really nice way to sort of like wind down in that afternoon. But it works a lot better in the afternoon rather than like if I waited until 8 o'clock at night. That's not happening. So I've been doing that and making sure that I do my sort of, I have like 15 minutes of mobility doing that. And all of those things just have a really positive impact on my mental headspace and just focus and productivity, all of that sort of stuff. So they're the kind of things that I'm sort of focusing on for the new year. Like I'm getting there with running like after the stress fracture, but I'm still probably only about like half of the volume I'd normally do. It's just been slow, which is fine. Like it's just good. And it's not like slow for no reason, like I did some jumping today and I can still feel that it's not necessarily not good, but it's not like where it was. So, like these things just take time to build up, and you got to invest a little bit more in sort of rehab and everything like that. So I'm sort of happy with where the running's at. I'm not sure what events will look like this year. If there are things to do, great. If not, I'll just like keep on going. That's all good. I've certainly felt a lot better on the runs this week with those things happening, and that's always good to be mindful about too, because it's easy to underplay those sorts of little routines. It's like, how much difference does it actually make? But when you feel it, it's good to remind yourself, like, see, this is the result, because it's easy with those things that are kind of repetitive to kind of devalue them and then, let them slide, and then 4 weeks later you're like, why does everything hurt? So that's sort of what is my focus is for the first part of the year, as well as I put on probably about at least 10 kilos over the year, and I don't really have any problem with that. Like, it is what it is. You know what you got to do. And it was funny, I was saying to my coach at the gym that I think the positive thing with that is that when I've been getting like all of these memories in like time hop, where I look at myself like a year or two ago and I'm like, man, I was lean. But I don't look at that and feel bad about where I am now. Like I look at that and I think that's impressive. And it reminds me that, if that's something I want, I can do it again. So that's what I'm sort of focusing on. I'm doing like a little bit of a just getting back into my my tracking, and particularly having a focus on like most of the food being not processed food. So just it's a lot of food to make, but the first week has been good, and I've definitely been feeling heaps better in workouts and runs and all that from just all of that focus. So for me, I think really the year is more about those things that seem kind of secondary, that are like supports, but the reality is they're kind of the main game. So I guess I just wanted to say there are loads of ways to look at, like, if you have something that you're working on, don't allow like all of those other opinions to sort of like devalue what you want to work on, or make you feel guilty about it, or like it can be like a hard space to be in. I always feel a bit that way when like I'm working on a fat loss goal. It's like I don't want people to feel like they should be doing what I'm doing. This is just what I'm doing for me to feel good where I'm at, and it's nothing to do with anyone else. So, and sometimes when you're doing that, like, it is good to just create like a little bit of a bubble around yourself, so you're not being exposed to a whole heap of other inputs coming in. I tend to do this particularly with, it's really easy with nutrition when you're working on it to get distracted by something shiny. So once I commit to a plan, that's my plan. I don't tend to read anything else about like nutrition, because I don't need any more information. Like, I know what I'm supposed to do. And essentially, like, if you have a fat loss goal, like, all the plans work the same way with a calorie deficit. So it's finding like what works best for you to create that. For me, it's tracking macros works for me. But for other people, they might find like, hey, if I do this intermittent fasting thing and I have like a window of only 8 hours where I'm eating, then that's just a really easy, natural way of creating that deficit. Or for other people, it might be like, say, doing keto. As soon as you separate fat from carbs, you just find that it's easier to maintain that deficit. So whatever works for you, do that. But the main thing is just the consistency of it. So I find just pick something, stick to it, and write it out, much like running, really, is that if you're constantly chopping and changing plans, you're just not going to see the results that you want to see. And so whatever it is that you're working on, it can really help to sort of create that little bubble. So while you're building confidence, you're not having like a gazillion inputs pulling you in a gazillion different directions. And that's sort of what we try to do with, or what I try to do with Learn to Run, which is actually starting in 10 days, which is exciting. So that's open. You can register for that now. And that has plans ranging from like absolute beginner, where we're starting with like 15-second run intervals, and that can be adapted to, like, if that's too much for you, we can do something else. And then there are other levels all the way up to somebody who's already running 30 minutes continuously but would like to really consolidate that fitness. So it goes all the way up from absolute beginner to like beginner, but like 15 seconds like is a bit too beginner, to sort of like more of an intermediate to like an advanced. And depending on what style of program you pick, the premium one is customized. So we might start with something as a starting point, but then as you go, we'll change this, or like, actually I want to do this plan, but I want to be able to run 10Ks at the end, not 5, and change it and do all of that. So part of that is creating like just a bubble of positive reinforcement, and where everyone is sort of like working the same system, and it makes a lot easier to sort of like make that change. And regardless of what you're working on, that helps. And then the other thing to keep in mind with that too is, if you are working on things for the new year, is what context you're putting around that. So say, for example, I had like, one of my goals was to do like probably meditation 5 times a week. And I created that goal, like I actually aim to do it 7 days a week. I aim to do it every day, but I created it as like 5 because, sometimes stuff happens. But I think the important thing for that is, like, say, for example, if I had like a week where I didn't do 3 days or whatever, rather than looking at that like, that's a failure, I could look at that and go, okay, what about this environment or the way I'm approaching this is not working for me? And so I could look at that and say, for example, it might be, I'm actually trying to do this too late in the day and I'm tired and it's an easy thing to skip. Maybe I need to move it earlier in the day. What I've been doing, which has been working for me, is I don't try to do it in the house with the kids. By doing it when I do yoga, I'm in the garage, so I'm on my own. Well, the cat's in there, but she mostly does her own thing, chases a few lizards. And so like that's sort of working for me in that I'm away from sort of distractions and all of that sort of stuff. So if it wasn't happening, I could look at, do I need to change the environment? Do I need to change the time of day? Maybe it's even that like, hey, I'm actually just really struggling to be comfortable like sitting down for 10 minutes. Maybe I need to start with a lying down meditation. Maybe that would help me. Whatever it is, looking at all the little tweaks that you can make to sort of like ease your path, rather than be like, oh, well, I tried this, it didn't work for me, it's over. And that's sort of also like what I try to do with Learn to Run, is similar things. It's like, okay, like this didn't happen this week. Was this just like a fluke, a one-off, or is there something in that environment that needs to be changed, or is there something in the program that needs to be changed, or like what is happening? So taking a curious mind into that process and creating a context where things aren't fixed forever, then it's going to make all of that stuff so much easier for your year, for any goals that you might want to set for the year. And I think it just creates a more positive attitude as well, in terms of, like, just not bringing potentially the idea of like, I've failed at something, or I'm not enough here, or whatever, and just taking it outside of that and be like, okay, there is an obstacle here that I didn't initially recognize. And so taking that and not like having it be something that is internalized, and just looking at the external setup. And sometimes it might also be like, hey, I had this goal, and I think that maybe I set it because it was something that I thought I should do, but actually I don't really care about it that much, and I don't really want to do it. And that's fine too. Like, that's a great insight. And so, like, you might be like, hey, like, I kind of like the idea of yoga, but I really don't like the sort of like the more spiritual aspect of yoga. And so actually, like, doing a yoga session irritates me. And I think that what I need to be looking at is some stretching programs instead that have that aspect of it without the other stuff, and just sort of like working on things from that point of view. So that is sort of like where I'm at. I've sort of been on sort of holidays and just sort of assessing like what the next year is going to be like, because I'm looking at going back to uni, which is like another thing to sort of take into account. It's like what are the goals for the year? How is my sort of running and other things that I'm going to do going to like support like my capacity in these other areas, and what is it going to look like, and like where do I need to be more productive? Where do I need to cut myself some more slack? Like all of those things. And it is, I think, it's an arbitrary time to go, oh, new year, I'll start thinking about all this stuff. But, it's a good a time as any to look at that sort of thing. And yeah, I think that oftentimes, like, because a lot of people have time off at this time of year, particularly if you're a business owner, because, you have that natural sort of like shutdown period while everyone's on holidays. And so oftentimes it's the only time to really think about that, because like most of the time you're sort of just like on the hamster wheel of everyday life. You don't have time to think about, like those sort of bigger picture things. So like having that time to do very little, which is what I've done the last couple of weeks, and just like, allowing your body to have that time so that then you can just be able to look at things with fresh eyes, with a creative mind, and say, okay, what do I want this to look like? What's going to best serve me? All of that sort of stuff. Anyway, it was so nice to do this. I've missed doing this. I just, I guess like some of the friction points in recording the podcast have actually been as simple as I need to buy a second house. And sometimes it is that simple. And those like small things can actually, like, particularly when you've got a lot on, can become really overwhelming things. Because it's not just like, oh, I've got to go buy a mouse. It's like, okay, like, I've got to like go out to the shops, buy a mouse. And there are steps in that process. And a lot of times when you're overwhelmed, it's those sorts of things of like that always end up just going, oh, I'll do it later. And that's the kind of thing that you need to look at when you're looking at obstacles that may get in your way, because sometimes they can be super simple things. Like for ages, I would be like, oh, I don't want to like do sort of like some of these mobility things in front of the TV because we've got hardwood floors. Like all I needed to do was like buy a yoga mat from Kmart. But they're the kind of things when your life and capacity is already full are the kind of things that trip you up. So starting to look at what those sort of, I guess, pain points are can really help you with anything that you're working on this year. So one of the things I will be working on is hopefully, I think it's not so much, I would really like, I say this every year, which is why I'm pausing here. I would really like to get a more consistent schedule with things. Like I know that there are times when I get really busy where it's really hard to do the podcast regularly, and that's fine because coaching is a lot more important than recording the podcast. But I think that there has to be a balance there, and whether that's recording it less but having it be more reliable, that's what I would really like. And it is something that has thus far eluded me, but it's just one of those that it's just like another troubleshooting thing. And one of the things that I've recognized about myself is that I just do so much better with a deadline. Like when things are open-ended or self-paced, I'm really awful at it. But when things are like, this is the deadline, I can meet a deadline. So I think that that is something that I'm hoping for this year. But it's also, I guess, too, when I'm going to be sort of like over the next week, looking forward to making a plan, which I've got several notebooks for, you'd be pleased to know, so I can write everything down. And I think also some of it is like, okay, if I'm going to university, I'm doing that. I've got, like coaching stuff to do and other paid work to do. Like where are my priorities going to be? And hopefully that will include some greater consistency on my part. But also I'm okay with the fact that it might not, and it might just be the kind of thing that gets sacrificed to the uni gods. So yeah, but that is definitely what I'm aiming for. And I'm also very convinced that if I could significantly reduce my doom scrolling, there would be a lot more time for writing and podcasting and all the rest. So I'm just putting it out there in the hope that the sort of nature of accountability will kick in and it will help me out. So that's it for this episode. As always, I'll have the links for Learn to Run in the notes, and if there's anything specific you'd like to hear from me, or any questions you have, you can always email me. And I just spent like a really long time last week removing myself from like a lot of the sort of like the more like every mailing list I've joined based on entering a competition, so that my email is a lot less of a trash fire scenario. So yeah, hopefully I will be back next week, and yeah, any questions at all about Learn to Run or what that looks like, just give me a shout. And you can do that by email, messenger on Facebook or Instagram, all things that I can respond to and help you with, and all the rest of it. And I will chat to you soon.